Chris, welcome back to the show, man.
So good to see you, my friend. I think it's been way too long.
Way too long, but obviously we've seen each other since then. We've hung out a couple times. You spoke at my event last year, but it's been way too long to have a conversation on the record. Like
That's right. Yeah, but it's just always good to catch up with you, man. Whether it's like this over Zoom or it's in person or we're grabbing a beer. Like that was one of the last times I saw you too.
in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, grabbing
That
a
was
beer at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like,
after a random indie pro wrestling show.
I love it. I love it, dude. But honestly, like I love what you're doing in the space. I love what you're building. I said this to you when I first reached out to you. I was like, I would love to interview you on your interview style. Like, obviously, yes, I'm a wrestling fan. I think when I had you on 3 years ago, I was still a closeted wrestling fan. Like, I wouldn't tell many people about it, but it's been blown out of the water now. Like, everybody knows at this point. So I've seen your interviews, and I was like, I love your interview style. But you've continued to get better, and you continue to ask the right questions. And here's what I want to. This is where I want to start. And I think people are interested in this because people love things that go viral on social media. People love all that stuff. How do you know to ask questions that will actually play well on social media in that short little 30, 60, 90-second clip?
I think the short answer is you don't really know. I think you can only just give your best guess. But for me, when I'm preparing to do an interview, I will usually type that person's name into YouTube, and then you see, okay, these are the things, like these are the movies they're known for if they're an actor. These are the matches they're known for if they're a wrestler. These are the knockouts they're known for if they're a UFC fighter. And I go, okay, great. Like these are some of their, like, call them career highlights. So somewhere in the conversation, we're going to try to get to that. And then that will turn into a social media clip. So I'm doing the same thing that you do and so many other creators do, where you have the one long form piece of content. It's an hour-long podcast episode. You're going to break that up into 6 to 10 shorter clips that are 3 to 8 to 10-ish minutes, the widescreen clips. And then I'm going to make 8 to 10 or more vertical videos, call them reels, call them shorts, call them TikToks, whatever you want to call them. So you're making a ton of content from that 1 hour long video that you have. So I like to think of it like this. I think of the vertical video as breadcrumbs, which will hopefully, if you're interested and you're hungry enough, if we're sticking with the analogy, will lead to the piece of bread, which is the longer 3 to 5 to 10-minute clip. And then if you like that, you'll go to the loaf of bread, which is the full podcast episode or full YouTube video.
Yeah, and you've been at this a really, really long time, right? Like you have to constantly evolve with the social media platforms. How has that changed over the last, I don't even know how long you've been doing these interviews, over the last 10 years, from the strategy standpoint of how to get the right interview to now breaking down all this content?
Oh, it's changed so much. I mean, so if we go way back, my background's in broadcasting, radio and television. That was always my dream as a kid, to be on the radio or to be on TV. That has shifted so much since I started in 2005, right when I graduated from college. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't even turn on their TV anymore. And when they do turn it on, they're turning it on for Netflix or Hulu, and they're not turning it on for, broadcasting in the traditional sense of the word. So it's changed so much. I started my YouTube channel in 2011. And for me at that time, it was kind of just a dumping ground of like, I did this interview with this really cool person, and we talked about some awesome stuff that nobody's ever heard before. I want this to live somewhere so that their fans can appreciate this. Now it's turned into like, I'm going to do an episode every Tuesday and I'm going to do an episode every Thursday. So like I've made that agreement with my audience that I'm going to show up every Tuesday and every Thursday. I'm hoping that you're also going to show up on those days as well. And I'm really thinking about it now of like, what can we get out of every single conversation? Like what are the nuggets that we can pull out of that person? What are the stories we can pull out of that person? And selfishly, I'm just going into these conversations like, this person is the very best at what they do in whatever field it happens to be. What are the things that I can pull out that I can bring into my life? And then hopefully our listeners will also go, oh yeah, I'm going to apply that to my life too.
Yeah, dude, I'm so glad you said that, because I often say when I'm telling my story and the journey of my podcasting life, for the first 2 years, every single question was for me. Somehow, when you realize you're going through so much shit in life, like there are so many other people going through that same thing, right? So like just being curious, I feel in the interview space, whether it's on podcasting, broadcast TV, whatever, being curious, I believe, is a superpower, right? Like truly caring about what people have to say. But my question for you is, how do you shift into being curious about, and you don't have to mention who, but about people you may interview that you don't really care about, but you know it'll be beneficial to you?
I mean, I'm really trying to look at it through the lens of like what's in it for me, because I feel like we're living in a time now, especially with social media and so much stuff being out there, that people can see through inauthentic. Like if you're not being authentic, they can see through it in a second. So I think that you do have to genuinely be interested and genuinely be curious. And maybe you're not interested in whatever business it is that they've built, or maybe you're not a massive fan of the sport it is that they're a professional in, but there's something in their journey that no matter what they do and no matter what their background is, that will be able to apply to your life. So I try to look for the common ground and the commonality between what I'm doing in my life and what they've accomplished in their life.
No, dude, I love that answer. I think it's totally spot on. You know, and obviously you interview people from all walks of life, from mostly known for the wrestling world, right? If somebody were to find your YouTube channel, it's mainly wrestling. I think it might be all
Yeah.
wrestling on there. And then you go to people like, even though it's a bad example because he was a wrestler, but like The Rock or Tom Cruise or Oprah, like all these people you've been able to sit down and interview. Is there a different approach? Because you do short form interviews, you do long form interviews. What's the different approach from a long form interview to the 5-10 minutes you might get during a press junket?
Oh man, I think the approach is so vastly different. But the one thing that remains the same in all of them is you've got to build rapport almost instantly. So whether your interview is 90 seconds on a red carpet and you get one or two questions and that's it, whether it's 4 or 5 minutes in a press junket and you're going to get 3, 4, or 5 questions, maybe if you're lucky, or if it's an hour-long interview and you get to basically have an actual conversation. I think the one thing that remains the same is you've got to build that rapport. You've got to find some sort of common ground to relate on so that that person can go, oh, I enjoy speaking with this person, or wow, what a great way to phrase that question. So I think that that's the most important thing. But when you have a long form interview like this, and this is my favorite, I love the medium of podcasting. I love that you can build into an actual conversation. You can spend 10, 15, 20 minutes. You can spend the whole episode talking about one topic. When you're interviewing somebody like Tom Cruise for, Mission Impossible, most of the focus of the interview is going to have to be about that movie. You got to find a way to like, I want to ask you a question about this, but how does that weave back into the movie here? Because I know that you ultimately want to sell the film. So I think the approach is so different. And I will say that my approach to interviewing has changed a lot over the last, call it 18 to 24 months, with the idea in my head that like short form is such a driver now to get people to listen to the full episode. And it's such a driver to like drive those views up, that I think so much now of like, okay, this is the full conversation, but if I ask this person about this thing and they tell a great story about that, that's a clip. And in fact, there'll often be times when I'm doing an interview and I'm like, oh, that's a good one. And I like, kind of like make a mental note, like, oh, that's one. I got to tell my editor about that one. Oh, that's another one. Got to tell my editor about that. Or like sometimes I'll have a pen in my hand and I'm like still looking at the camera, but I'm like writing out a note. Like, oh, yeah, that'll be a good one.
I love it. So what you're saying is I should bring up the time that you insulted Catwoman. And of course I forget her name.
Yeah, that's, oh my goodness. It's funny. Here we are 12 years after that interview. So for people that don't know, I was interviewing Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway, that's it.
Yes. For a movie called One Day, but the photos of her as Catwoman, as Selena Kyle from The Dark Knight Rises had just come out. Like these leaked photos from the set. And I'm like, I got to ask her some sort of question about that. Cause like her just talking about The Dark Knight Rises is going to be really interesting. And we can make that a separate like news story on its own. I went into that interview and I written out a bunch of questions about One Day, and she speaks with a British accent in that film, which I thought was very interesting. And then I think in my notes, I just wrote down like Catwoman, like literally just Catwoman. And I didn't like think out the full question. And if I had time, I was going to, ask her something about Catwoman. So I wanted to make this like a fitness diet type of question, because I've always been very interested in fitness. I've been working out since I was a kid. I've always been fascinated by the idea of an actor getting into like insane, crazy shape for a role. These body transformations, whether it's Christian Bale getting jacked to play Bruce Wayne / Batman, Christian Bale getting super skinny for The Machinist. Like I've always been very interested in that. So when I phrased that question to her, it was, how much weight did you have to lose to get into the shape to be Catwoman? She had a fun, playful moment. And she's like, oh, what a forward young man you are. How much weight did I lose? Like she had fun with it. And all these years later, it's so funny seeing the comments of some people being like, on one side of the spectrum, like, oh man, what a fun moment, bro. She wanted you. To on the other end of the spectrum being like, how rude, how dare he ask someone about their weight, which is so funny because a few years later, she talked all about how much weight she lost to win an Oscar for Les Mis. And no one seemed to be like, why are you asking Anne Hathaway about weight? It's a thing that actors do, whether you are a man or a woman. It's a thing that actors do. They talk about the weight that they've lost or gained for roles. I've asked that same question of Christian Bale, of Chris Hemsworth, of Chris Evans. It's not a bad question to be asking.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I want to shift gears really quick. You mentioned how you've always been into fitness. You've always been into getting shape, and you just recently turned 40. So you got in the best shape of your life. Like, and you like, how much did you pay somebody to Photoshop those photos?
That would have been a lot easier, my friend. Oh my goodness. If I had just Photoshopped those photos, it would have been a lot easier. But I've always been fascinated with the idea of like, so-and-so put on 30 pounds for this movie role, or so-and-so lost 20 pounds to get shredded for this role. I've always been fascinated by that. And I've always been in pretty good shape myself, but I was like, what would happen if I really dialed it in? Like, what would happen if I dialed in my nutrition, dialed in my workouts, dialed in my cardio? And we're not talking about doing this like every day for a year or every day for 5 years. This was going to be 90 days. What if for 90 days I could focus on eating right and working out right? And dude, the results were crazy. And like, it was also amazing how quickly things started to really shape up. Like I wasn't in terrible shape to begin with, but yeah, I wasn't in my best shape. But by the time my 40th birthday came around on May 19th, I looked at those photos and I'm like, I can't even believe that's me. Like, I seriously can't believe that I look like that now. And that's just a testament to, one, I had an incredible coach. His name's AJ Sims. You can look him up on Instagram. He's at Cement Factory. He works with the best of the best, and also me. So like to be able to work with him and have him basically just tell me exactly what to eat, how much of it to eat, when to eat. It was like, oh yeah, this is really easy. Like, oh, it's my third meal of the day. Okay, I'm eating this and this. Great, easy. That really, really helped. But it's also like the biggest thing here is dedication. It's if you are dedicated to whatever it is, I think that you're able to achieve like insane results just by going, here's what I have in front of me today. Let's do all these things today. Great. And we'll worry about tomorrow when we wake up tomorrow.
Yeah, what a great approach. And it is all about consistency, discipline, showing up, doing the work. And again, in anything, right? Like people ask me all the time, like, how do you grow your podcast? How do you get the people on your show that you get on your show? And honestly, I showed up every week. And now it's been for 7.5 years, right? Like back in the day when people didn't even know what a podcast was, I was doing one. And it's really, again, it's about that consistency. And so the reason I brought up the Photoshop thing is because you got a lot of flack from people on the internet. Like, these are Photoshop. There's no way you actually did this, all these things, right? And you are somebody who's always been in shape. And so it was a fascinating thing. Now, do you believe controversy works in your favor when it comes to creating content?
Look, I want to address the photoshopping thing, because along with that, there were also a lot of comments that people thought I was on steroids, that people thought I was doing TRT, which is testosterone replacement therapy. And it's just hilarious that there's people who aren't willing to put in the work. They would just rather make excuses for someone who is willing to put in the work. And it was so fascinating to me because it said so much more about what those people are going through in their life and where those people are at in their life than it says about me. Like, of course I didn't do steroids. I'd be a lot bigger if I had done steroids, never done steroids. But it was amazing to me, people saying that these were Photoshop photos or that I was on TRT. It was like, those are those people going, I could never accomplish this because I'm not dedicated enough to doing it, which means someone else can't be possibly dedicated enough to doing this, which must mean, therefore, it is impossible to do it. I just thought that was so funny. But to answer your actual question, I think that unfortunately we're living in a time now where like it's click driven, right? And the people will see a headline, not read the entire article, and go, well, I saw this headline about this thing. That must be, the case. We also live in this really weird world right now that like reaffirms biases. Like, I think algorithms are great. The TikTok algorithm is fascinating and showing you all the things you're interested in and things you didn't even know you'd be interested in. They're showing you that stuff. Like, it's so good. But what it often does is it reaffirms your bias, whether you're left or right or whatever your political beliefs are. If you start to like those types of photos or videos, well, what's the algorithm going to do? It's going to just continue to show you stuff that you're going to also like and engage with. And it's not going to show you what the other side of it is. So it's really interesting sometimes that you could form this belief that could be reaffirmed by all the accounts that you follow and the stuff that you're being shown in the algorithm. And you just go, oh, this must be the way it is because my worldview is like this. It's such it's like tunnel vision.
Yeah. Yeah. Which causes controversy in the world in general, because you're like, well, I'm not seeing any of these things you're talking about, the conspiracy theory spin on everything. And it's really bizarre. And the reason I asked that about posting something controversial, I had a reel on Facebook go viral. It was like 7.3 million views or something like that. It was ridiculous. Thousands of comments. Like,
wow.
And it's because I posted a video of my stepdaughter, who I call my bonus daughter, in her Halloween parade at school, and she refused to break character. And I put over like a voiceover thing over it that said, when your bonus daughter refuses to break character, when you go see it, whatever it said. The comments were all people yelling at each other about what's a bonus daughter. Somebody saying, how could you not like your kid so much you got to call it a bonus kid? Like all these like crazy things. And I was like, and that's the only reason it blew up, is because all those comments back and forth and people arguing. And I found it funny, but I'm glad that you addressed it in the way that you did, because people get offended by that. People would have been like, oh, wow. Like, they're saying I'm taking steroids. What's wrong with me versus what's reflecting on them?
And I think that that's what you see like so much of like, how often do you look at a video and you go, oh boy, I wonder what the comments are on this one. And then you go, oh, there it is. And the problem that I think exists right now in the current world that we're in with social media and the current slice of time that we're in is that sometimes people will watch a video and they'll go, I'm not really sure what to think about this. And then they go to the comments to go, oh, yes, that is what I think about this. And you didn't really have an opinion to begin with. And then you see enough people in the comments saying something, you go, you know what? Now that you put it like that, that is how I think about this. And I think that that's actually going to be an issue. And we're going to look back, I think, on this time, because we are still very much in the infancy of social media and sharing our thoughts. Like, it's really only been a thing. Sure, Facebook was a thing in 2004 if you were a college student at certain schools. It became more mainstream in like the late 2000s, but social media, where it's like the first app that you open when you get on your phone, has really only been a thing for about 10 to 12 years. And I think that because we're in such an early stage right now, we're going to look back on this in 20, 30, 40, 100 years and go, can you believe that this is the way we used to do things?
Yeah, it's really bizarre. And I want to kind of switch gears really quick, because we're talking about now the future of what social media looks like, about what media looks like in general, right? Because I think even now, mainstream media, CNN, NBC, they don't really exist compared to now Twitter, which is now X, or, their streaming platforms that they're trying to create on that, or Joe Rogan's podcast, or all these other mediums. What do you see the future for your daughter? And then we'll shift into that change in your life.
I think it's going to continue to go down this path of like reaffirming biases. I really do, because when we grew up as kids, you turned on the TV and you were getting, pretty much the same news on all the major networks, whether that was ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox. You were pretty much getting the same news of like, as unbiased as it could be. I think we can all agree that's certainly changed over the last handful of years. What's continuing to happen with all these different streaming platforms and the social media algorithms is you're going to be able to go, well, I don't agree with that channel's perspective on things, so I will just continue to watch this one. And if I want to go even deeper, there's this viewpoint and this vantage point. But if I want to go even deeper into that, I could also go over to this platform. I think that that's just going to continue to be a thing. Like, I think this idea of broadcasting, and I'm emphasizing on the word broad. We talked about this last time I was on. I think that idea of it being broad and being for everybody is so going to go away. And the idea of it being more niche is going to continue to just be a bigger thing. This next election that we have next year is probably going to be one of the last elections that people are going to look at, like the main coverage of it on like the national news sources on TV. I think as we get into 2028 and 2032 and beyond, it's going to just be like all on here, all on your phone.
Yeah, I don't even know if this election coming up is going to be mostly consumed on television. Like, I'm seeing a massive shift, right? And by the way, we're not talking about political affiliations. I don't affiliate with either of them, but Tucker
I'm from
Carlson,
Canada, okay? I can't even vote.
That's a whole different story. But, you know, the Tucker Carlson is now not on television. And he's just doing streams on X, and he's getting more views. And, you know, one of your friends and business partners talked about this, right? He talked about how much money he can make just going off on his own. It creates a whole new platform for creators to really be able to create a massive living for them if they're able to hit the right notes, right?
And I think what we're going to all start to realize, if we haven't already realized it, is that we are all creators. And it's funny how even just a few years ago, you wanted to set up lights and you wanted to get a, you know, nice camera. That's how you would make your videos. Now it's just a matter of like, especially when you see like Twitch or you see TikTok, it's just a matter of like literally, you know, turning your phone on to selfie mode and hitting record. And I'm actually amazed how many times I'll see someone on TikTok and they're fumbling over their words, or they're saying, I forgot what I was saying here. Oh yeah, that's it. And I'm like, you know, you could have just done another take. And maybe that's the broadcaster in me going like, if it's not perfect, like, you know, do it again until it is perfect. Like it's not live, so just record it again. I think it's so interesting now that we all have the equipment to be creators sitting in our pocket. You know, we're all content creators here. And I think that that's going to continue to shift just as time goes on. This is why, you know, you mentioned my business partner, Travis Chappell. This is why we've created Full-Time Creator, because so many people now, no matter what age you are, want to be a creator. You want to leave that job that you hate going to on Monday morning, because it'd be so much better to just turn on the camera and make YouTube videos, or, you know, put a mic in front of you and become a podcaster. Everybody wants that. And I don't think that there's a clear path to get there. So we're hoping with Full-Time Creator, and go to the website, fulltimecreator.co, to check out what we're doing there. We're hoping that we can show you, by all the mistakes that we've made, that you won't make them, and that there'll be more of a clear path to actually making your first dollar as a creator.
Yeah, and that's such an invaluable thing that you guys are teaching. You're two people who have really mastered it. Travis, over the last year or so, has really, really, really started to hit on all cylinders with his content creation across all platforms, which I've known Travis for years now, and got to spend some time with him, I think last year at PodFest, and really talking about his business models and everything. And I think if people get access to that, they can truly take it and run with it. Even if you don't want to be a full-time creator, but you want to be an entrepreneur, guess what? Being an entrepreneur means creating. It means creating content that hits with the right people, that gets you in front of the right audience. And so even if it's not the idea of, hey, I want to be an interviewer or I want to be whatever, you have to create content that hits.
I will say the one thing that has impressed me the most with Travis, and I'm not just saying this because he's, you know, our friend, is you talk about how over the last year, he's really ramped up his content. He's doing that with a 5-year plan. So this isn't like, all right, man, a reel a day for the month, 30 reels this month, which, by the way, I did that, call it challenge, 2 years ago. And I was like, how am I going to come up with 30 reels in 30 days? That seems like so much content. I know there's a lot of people thinking that same thing. He basically went into this and he went, over the next 5 years, I'm going to build out my YouTube channel. I'm going to build out my podcast. And if I'm not where I want to be in 5 years, at least I'll be a heck of a lot closer, because I'm working at this every single day. And I just thought that that long-term approach was so fascinating, because there's so many people that go, I want results and I want them right now. And they'll look back at like, well, you know, you said you'd edit these videos for me. I've been posting these videos for the last month and I've only gained like 14 followers. Like, okay, dude, be patient. Like that. I hate to sound like Gary Vee here, but like, patience is the most important thing in this whole game of like, you have 14 more followers than you did last month. Great. Let's build
Yeah.
on that. Maybe it could be 28 this month, and we can go, keep building on that from there.
Yeah, when we talk even about podcasting, right? And I say this often, 80% of shows do less than 100 downloads an episode. My show for a long time did less than 100 downloads an episode. And I remember being in like the 40s, it was like episode 45, 46, around that number, where I was like, what am I even doing? Nobody's listening, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody from Japan reached out to me and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life.
Wow.
And I realized that from that moment on, I'm just going to show up, no matter who's listening. And then because I kept showing up for so long, more people found me. They go, wow, he's consistent. I'll stick around. I'll keep listening. And it grew from there. But imagine if I quit because, I put in work for 40 weeks, by the way, almost a year, and I wasn't getting the results I expected. And the end of the day, like if you're a speaker or somebody like that, and you had a room full of 100 people every single week or every single day, would you show up? 100%. We have a false idea of what social media should look like because people do have 1 million followers and 100,000 downloads on every single video they post or whatever the case may be. And I think that's the kind of approach that everybody should take as they're creating whatever.
And I think that it's so hard because we create in a vacuum. Like, I am sitting in a room with a camera and a laptop, and that's it. You are also sitting in a room with a laptop, and that's it. And I think that sometimes you forget, because you're creating in this vacuum, you're forgetting that on the other side of this camera lens, there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that are hearing this message. And I think the most important thing that you said there that I really want to key in on is consistency. And I recently said, like, podcasting really begins at episode 100. And I know that, oh my gosh, if you're just starting right now with episode number 1, oh my gosh, 199 more of these? That sounds crazy. And I get it. If you're doing one podcast a week, that's 2 years from now. You're telling me I'm not really doing this until I'm 2 years into this. And the reason I say that is because, like, your first episode is going to suck.
Yeah.
And your second episode is going to suck, but it's not going to suck as much as your first episode. And then your third episode's also going to suck, but it's going to be slightly better than episode 1 and 2, and so on and so on and so on. And I think that by the time you get to like episode 100, you start to learn where your beats are, and you start to like figure out like, oh, okay, I should be asking this question instead of this question. Or, man, when I'm pitching guests, I should be sending emails that look like this rather than the emails I was sending that used to look like this. And I think that you end up learning so much in that process. And one of the best things is, through having a podcast like this, you start to really build your network, and you're starting to build people that go, man, I had such a great time at your show, Justin. Let me introduce you to so-and-so who would be a great guest. They would love to come on here. Or these might end up becoming conversations that you end up, being business partner with someone or something like that. I just think that the lessons along the way from episode 1 to episode 100 are absolutely invaluable.
Yeah. And I love the way that you put that. So I want to talk a little bit. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. You were on the show 3 years ago. Life looks a heck of a lot different for both you and I from 3 years ago. We're both now married. As a matter of fact, I sent a picture to you of me and my wife, then fiance, that I got engaged. And then probably a couple weeks later, you go, I figured I was going to do it too. And you sent me a photo of you and your now wife. We got engaged as well. And now you have a child. And so life is really, really different for you. How has your life changed from a work standpoint? And then what have you learned so far in the process for your own self as a father?
So I had a moment with The Rock that went quite viral, where I told him that we were going to have a kid and I was going to be a father for the first time. And I just wanted, a little bit of advice from a guy who seems to be a great father to his 3 daughters. And he gave me such great advice. And it was such a wholesome moment and something I'll really never forget, because he could have made that moment like, oh, that's great, man. I don't know, you'll figure it out as you go, but hey, congrats. And instead it ended up being like 2 minutes of like a heart to heart conversation, like a very thought out answer. One of the things he said is like, you're really going to know what your why is. Like, you think you're motivated now. Once that little girl comes out, you're going to really be motivated. And that's been one of the biggest things. Like, I've always been passionate about what I do. And I feel like I've always been super fortunate to my whole career be able to wake up excited for what I'm going to do that day. And then at the end of the day, hopefully, more often than not, I can go, man, that was a great day. I'm really proud of what I accomplished. Let's do it again tomorrow. That's been a big shift of like, I want to maximize my time, both the time I get to spend with my daughter, Logan, and my wife, Rachel. And I also want to maximize the time that I'm spending doing things that are work related. So that's meant like saying no a lot more than I used to say no. I feel like there was a lot of me that was like, oh, I don't actually have anything during that block of time. Great. Let's say yes to whatever that thing happens to be. That's been a big part of this, is like choosing where my time should be spent, because I could spend an hour or 2 or 3 on that thing that I don't know if it's going to be beneficial, or I don't know if it's going to propel me forward or propel the business forward. Or I could spend that time watching my daughter, who's never going to be this exact age ever again.
Yeah. So how's the journey been? How has it really affected your life from a standpoint, not only just saying no, but like, how do you then fit in all the time to do 2 podcasts a week, to do the content creation, to do the traveling, to do the getting in the best shape of your life, which that takes time and consistency. What has that been like? Is it really just prioritizing every minute as much as you can?
I wouldn't say that you would look at my calendar and know that every minute is like allocated, but it's definitely about priorities. That's been a really big thing, is like, where do your priorities lie now? And so that's changed and shifted a lot. I also think ahead way more than I used to. I think ahead like, okay, if I'm doing this thing with what I'm building now, what will that look like in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, or beyond? That's been the biggest shift. And it's also just like, you always hear parents talk about like, oh, as soon as you see them, like there's nothing quite like that. And it sounds so cliche, but my goodness, it is so true. And like, it's every morning she's starting to smile now. She's starting to do like her version of like talking, which sounds like blah, 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 blah. But it's like, it's so cute. And I know that we'll never have this again, where it's like, I want to be there for that. So it's just been a lot of like, it's been about prioritizing my time. I think that's been the biggest thing.
I love it. So as interviewers, we get this question a lot. Or I should say, when we're being interviewed, we get this question a lot. We get the question of, what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Yeah.
I'm going to flip that question a little bit for you.
Okay.
If there's only one lesson that your daughter could learn from you for when she is an older individual, an adult, what do you want that lesson to be?
Oh, only one.
Only
Man,
one.
what are you doing to me here? And this is her like when she's like a little bit older, I guess.
Yeah, this is her when she's an adult and she's living her life, for herself.
Oh, I wish, I don't even know what the lesson is for me. Like, I wish that someone would just, break down life. Like, this is the secret to life. Like, just do this one thing, or just keep this one thing in mind. I really think that if I'm going to have to think of something right off the top of my head right now, I think I've been such a big gratitude person. Gratitude really is like the driver of my life. It's the question I ask at the end of every interview. What are 3 things you're grateful for right now? I think that the lesson for her would be like, then it all starts with gratitude, because what is going right in your life is right there. And also what's going wrong in your life is also right there. And it's a matter of, what do you want to focus on? And the reason I ask that question at the end of every episode, what are 3 things you're grateful for, is I'm hoping that someone who's listening or watching on YouTube is going to go, wow, that person who is so successful and has much more money than I do, they're grateful for things that I have in my life. They're grateful for their family, or they're grateful for a roof over their head, or they're grateful for the opportunities that are in front of them every single day. My goodness, what if I were to start to frame my life in that way, and I could start to be grateful for those things that are right in front of me? I think that would be the lesson.
I love it. So what are 3 things you're grateful for right now?
Look at you turning the tables on me. I love it, Justin. It starts with family. Like, I'm just so grateful for my wife, Rachel, our little girl, Logan, my mom and dad. I'm so grateful for them, and like who they were when I was younger have now made me who I am now at this stage of my life. My whole family, my sister and her husband, my niece and nephews. So that's number one. Grateful for that. Grateful for health. because without health, it's really difficult to do anything else. Like I always say this phrase, but it's so true. Like the healthy man has 1,000 problems, the sick man has one. And when you are healthy, it's so easy to take for granted the fact that you are healthy and you can get out of bed and you can do the things that you want to do. So I'm very, very grateful that me and everybody that I love is healthy. And number three, I'm just so grateful for opportunity. Like we live in a time now where you and I are on other sides of the country. We are talking like we are sitting next to each other right now. And I think that that is it's just such an undervalued thing. Like even just 12, 15 plus years ago, the idea of like explaining FaceTime to somebody would just blow their mind. Like it's science fiction what we're able to do now. So I am so grateful for the opportunities that we have in front of us. And I'm grateful that those opportunities just continue to grow as we continue to figure out what is social media, what is the internet, what are all the different levers that we can pull here. Super grateful for that.
I love it, man. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there, go over all the information. How do people get a hold of you? How do they work with you in your new program that you just launched yesterday? What is all the good stuff, man?
So head to fulltimecreator.co. I know there's a lot of people that are listening to this that are making content and they're like, oh my goodness, only 7 people listen to my podcast, or I only get 61 views on YouTube. Travis and I are really going to help you hone in on the best way to get those numbers up and also to be able to make your first dollar from this, like, and truly become a creator from that. So that's fulltimecreator.co. And know that by joining us with what we're doing here, that you're not doing this alone. And I think that's a big thing, which we talked about earlier. This can feel like you're in a vacuum and you're alone and you don't know what the next step is. We want to be able to help you out. And then you can find me on social media. It's just at Chris Van Vliet. And wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can find my podcast, Insight with Chris Van Vliet. Especially if you're a wrestling fan, you might like these very in-depth conversations with some people you've heard of, like The Undertaker or Stone Cold Steve Austin. Or if you're into the entrepreneurial space, go check out my conversations with people like Ed Milet, Lewis Howes, Chris Voss, who I believe was a guest on your show, former FBI negotiator. Lots of great conversations on there.
Yeah. And honestly, like, even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think this is why I've always liked your interview style. Yes, you'll talk about their matches at certain times and stuff like that, but you dive into life and mindset and work ethic and all those things that we talk about on this show. So guys, make sure you go check it out. And honestly, go sign up, fulltimecreator.co. Like, here's the thing. And I talk about this all the time. You need to invest in your future, whether that's a small amount of money or a large amount of money, just so you can fast forward the process. Why make the mistakes that we've all made when you can learn from 2 masters who have done it, who've honed their craft, and who are full-time content creators? So go there, check it out. And like I said, Chris, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, and that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
And I can't remember what my answer was last time we were together.
Life has changed since we were together last. So,
I mean, I'd say having a kid is a pretty big moment of growth. That certainly forces you to be an adult real quick. So I think that that'll be the personal one. I'll give you 2 answers. So that's the personal answer, like becoming a parent. And I now see my wife in a completely different light now. Like, I don't know how it was ever possible, but I now love her more, seeing her as a mother, and seeing our little girl grow every single day. That's been a huge moment of growth. I will say professionally, and this is probably the answer I gave last time, and if it's not, you get a new answer. I had my dream job. 2006, 2007, I was hosting a show for MTV2 Canada. I picked up my entire life, moved from one side of the country to the other side of the country, and I was hosting this show. Instantly started interviewing the biggest musicians on the planet, the biggest comedians, the biggest actors. And a year in, one big media company bought another big media company, which I happened to be working for. They merged together and our show got canceled, which means that our jobs no longer existed. So I went from having my dream job to having no job in a second, just like that. And I had to make a decision very quickly of like, do I stay here and try to find another job and try to pick up the pieces and figure this out? Or do I go back home drive 47 hours home and move back in with my parents and start to look for another job again. And that's what I ended up doing. And that was such a huge moment of growth of like, I had the thing, I know what it tastes like. I want it again. And it made me hungrier for what was next. And I was unemployed for 7 months after being on this massive show and interviewing, these huge celebrities, to then doing nothing. And that was what made me hungrier for more professionally, of like, I had it. It was right there. I want it again. And I will say that without that being taken away from me, I don't know if I would have been able to appreciate it as much as when I got to do it again, when I got another job 7 months later.
Chris, thank you so much, man, for coming on and sharing your wisdom with my audience, but more importantly, for your friendship and for everything you're doing in the world, dude. I appreciate you.
Dude, I appreciate you. I love you, man. And it's so great to be able to catch up with you on a public forum like this, but I'm out your way in like a week or two. So I think we should grab another beer.
Yeah, dude, let me know. We'll talk soon.
Let's do it.